All right, let's go ahead and get started. We had 155 people signed up this morning, so I know more are going to join us, but we are delighted that you're here to join us. And we've got we said we'd only do this if there was important stuff to share, and we have some great important information to share with you. This is our 45th. I calculated it in the shower this morning. There have been 75 weeks since the emergency pandemic was announced in the middle of March in 2020. So we've had a lot of sessions, and I hope you've enjoyed them. I know so many of you have commented on it, and we're going to keep it going as long as it seems like it's providing a lot of value to you. An issue that kept coming up with us was this whole mental health issue. So we decided we ought to talk to some people who we think are doing a good job at reducing some of the burnout and increasing their support for mental health. And so we're going to cover that today. We've got three great guests to introduce to you. And then we're going to do a legal update, and Tyler Morris is here to help us with that. But three special guests. Oh, let me hit those real fast. Back up this one there. Kirsten Hawley, just a word about her. What a talent. Senior Vice President and Chief People Officer and Communications Officer for Brown-Forman. And she spoke at the SHRM conference, the Kentucky SHRM conference over in Louisville. And I had 6 people on 2 different panels, and she's the first one, though, that really spoke up about mental health and all the things that they were doing. And I just think you're going to find that fascinating and helpful. And it gave me some good ideas of things we could do in our workplace. But we also have, I'll get back to Kirsten in just a second, but Rebecca Prater is here. And she's HR and corporate wellness specialist at KEMI. Now, I know that KEMI, I think, is the largest workers' comp group in the state. They work with a ton of employers, but she's going to talk to us about what they're doing, because they see this from both sides, and they're doing some cool things in their workplace. And then Derek Wilhelmus is also with us, CEO of Wayne Corporation. He's spoken to us before about workers' comp things, but he's got some things to share about mental health today too. So let's roll right into this. And Kirsten, thank you so much for joining us. We are pleased to have you here. Folks, don't hesitate to put some questions in the chat box with us. Kirsten, take it away. Thanks for coming.
Sure. And Lyle, I want to thank you for the opportunity to continue to tell this story. And so for folks who were at the SHRM conference, you would have heard this before, but I think talking about mental health in the workplace is critical. I think that stigma still exists when it comes to mental well-being. And I think anything that companies can do, led by the HR function, to enable people to say out loud that they're not okay, and they know that their employer has resources to help get them better, really matters in today's workplace. And I think COVID only accelerated our need to be able to speak both about physical health and mental health. So I want to talk a little bit about my experience at Brown-Forman. I want to share some of what we put in place from a policy perspective and a program perspective to really help address what was a concerning potential mental health crisis. I'm going to take us back to what feels like 100 years ago, but it wasn't that long ago. It was March 13th of 2020. And March 13th of 2020 is when a whole lot of businesses in the Commonwealth sent people home, and Brown-Forman was one of them. And we had a crisis management team made up of our senior executive group. And we looked at each other and said, we're going to send people home, but this is probably, I don't know, a 2-week deal and we'll all be back. And that just shows you how naive we were back then about the pandemic and how much we did not yet understand. And we were all still home in May. And the executive team at the time was not saying this out loud, but we were saying to each other, maybe July, Labor Day at the latest. And again, it shows our naivete. But that May, I was asked to speak to our board of directors and to speak specifically about how I was thinking about reimagining HR in a post-pandemic world. Because again, we thought it was going to be over so quickly. And I'm still reimagining HR in a post-pandemic world because we're not there yet. But what I shared with our board of directors was a number of ideas about how this pandemic would change how we thought about remote work and flexible work and all the things we're talking about in the HR space today. But I concluded my presentation by saying that I was concerned that nothing that I thought we might reimagine would be possible in a workplace where folks were traumatized, where folks had just experienced a once-in-a-lifetime event that was truly frightening for many, and that we would need to make some investments in mental health so that what was a physical health crisis didn't turn into a mental health one. And it was risky to say that to a board of directors because, again, when you talk about mental health, it can still be stigmatized in plenty of organizations. But thankfully, our board of directors was supportive of this exploration, and it allowed us to then do a number of things. Job one back in May was to recognize that mental health was being significantly impacted because people were terrified they were going to lose their jobs. All of us saw a business slowdown, and the beverage alcohol industry, the industry I work in, was no exception. And so we had plenty of folks who were scared that the jobs that they did in a functioning society were no longer going to be available as a pandemic wore on. And so one of the things we did to address mental health in this way was to be very creative about redeployment of our human resources. Today, things are somewhat back, if that's an appropriate word, to normal. So we have not had to redeploy resources like we used to. But to give you an example, in my organization, I have folks who work in meeting planning, and nobody was having any meetings. People doing talent acquisition, and we were in a complete hiring freeze. And so thankfully inside the business, we could get really creative and redeploy these folks into short-term assignments, some which lasted a year, to be able to assure them they would still be getting paid, they were still gainfully employed, and they were doing meaningful work where we found ourselves woefully short-staffed in a pandemic. Interestingly enough, getting hand sanitizer into the hands of people who needed it turned out to be a far more complex project that needed more hearts, hands, and brains on it. The other thing that we did in this redeployment of resources is the folks who work in our cafeteria and provide food service support also found that half of the people who work here in our Louisville headquarters location went home. And these folks too were really frightened about what it would mean for their livelihood. But thankfully, because of our community relations orientation at Brown-Forman, not only did we continue to feed our essential workers who work in our production and manufacturing facilities here, we also then did a huge community relations outreach and made lunches for our neighbors and those in need. In fact, we made 70,000 lunches over the course of many months. And this had a two-pronged benefit. One, we were able to feed the communities using the resources at Brown-Forman to make sure people didn't go hungry, but we also kept our cafeteria team gainfully employed. When that project ended, we sponsored a learning hub here at Brown-Forman and needed to feed school kids from JCPS who were here in our facilities doing remote learning. And we were also then able to use our very talented staff to help feed folks. This reduced anxiety actually more broadly than just these teams because word got out that we were looking for ways to keep people employed regardless of where they were. So we ended up having very few layoffs because of this mentality of people first, business continuity second. We then moved into policy review and policy change. And that summer of 2020, we introduced a number of policies to help people get their feet underneath them and breathe. We have always had flexible work policies at Brown-Forman, but we encouraged, because remember, these are in many ways parents taking care of kids, small children who had no place to go in terms of school, daycare, camps. And so we reminded people of our flexible work policy and that there could be days that you might decide it's a meeting-free day or meeting-free times so that parents could take a breath and know that they could show up for where their children needed them to be. We reminded people that we could be creative with job sharing and part-time work if people needed to reduce hours in order to just stay employed through what I would call the hardest summer, which was the summer of 2020. We even put in place an interim parental leave policy that said if you needed to step out of the workplace for a 3-month period, you could do so without pay, but your benefits would be protected in terms of your medical benefits, and you could return after a 90-day period back to your same job, same pay, same responsibilities. The reason we came up with 3 months is it's often a typical maternity or parental leave when people have a baby, and we know we can cover things for 90 days, and we felt we could do so here. Interestingly enough, we didn't have anybody in the United States take advantage of this policy, but just knowing it was there turned out to be helpful for mental health. We expanded our flex vacation to include far more people, so that this way folks knew if they only had in previous times 2 weeks, we now have a flex vacation policy at Brown-Forman, which is pretty much, we don't track it. Take what you need to keep yourself sane. We expanded that, and I will tell you, we have not seen people abuse this at all. If anything, they just know that they are supported by their manager and by the organization in terms of time off. Senior leadership had to encourage time off because most people wouldn't take any. And I grew increasingly concerned about burnout. And so having senior leaders talk about taking time off just to take a break from the many hours of Zoom calls, the endless flows of emails, all the special projects, we knew we needed to remind people that recharging and resting was important. In the fall, we then introduced more programmatic elements, and we did this in coordination with the International Mental Health Awareness Day, which happens in October. And we launched mental health huddles around the world that were facilitated by a senior leader, most often a member of the executive team, and a member of HR. And we had a set program about what does mental health look like in the workplace. We wanted to take pressure off of managers that you didn't have to become employees therapists, but you needed to know the resources available to people when you started to see signs of concern in your team. We also talked about what can you do to encourage mental wellness inside an organization, and what can individuals do that works for them. We had people share their stories all around the globe about what they were doing to take care of themselves and their families. We also leaned hard into our EAP. And so we have an employee assistance program through our United Healthcare medical provider, and we negotiated with them to increase how often people could tap into sessions with an EAP counselor. Previously, it was 5 sessions, but we negotiated to double that to 10. And we did that because we wanted to make sure our families knew that if they or their loved ones needed additional support with the help of a therapist, it was available to them wherever they lived, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and that 10 sessions with a therapist was better than 5. 5 is good, but 10 is better. And we did see an uptick in the utilization of our EAP resources as people dealt with all that we have been trying to navigate and manage as leaders, as teams, as humans over the past 18 months. These mental health huddles will continue, and we do make it a point to talk about mental health just as often as we talk about physical health in many of the meetings that we continue to host. So that's my story at Brown-Forman. If I missed anything, Lyle, because I know you've heard it before, please prompt me, but otherwise I'll turn it back over to the facilitators for the next round of discussions.
Oh, that was great. And I appreciate those ideas. And anybody have questions or comments at this point?
Don't have any in the chat yet.
Okay. If you're able to hang on with us, Kirsten, you never know what'll pop up, and we'd love to have you. So
sure, happy to.
Okay, cool, good. All right. We have a second guest, and Rebecca Prater is on here with us. She's a senior HR and corporate wellness specialist at KEMI. She's certified as a corporate wellness specialist. She's also a PHR and a SHRM SCP. So you haven't wasted any time during your career, Rebecca. Good work, all that stuff. Tell us what's going on at KEMI and what are you doing for your families?
Yes. Well, thank you so much for having me. Can everybody hear me okay?
Loud and clear.
Awesome. Yes. Well, thank you, Kirsten, for what you shared. And we certainly recognized a lot of those same things. And I do remember March 13th very much in my mind as the last day I was in the office and thought, oh, we'll just be out for a couple weeks and then surprise. Certainly we have had to, pay attention as well with our people. So one of the things that we offer as far as benefits is paid salary continuation and disability coverage. That's something that we've always had, but employees have tended to think of that as just physical reasons for not being able to work. So we have just made sure a note to make sure employees realize, hey, this is for medical and non-physical medical. So making sure that they realize that they have that option to be off and be covered under that and be paid while they're off. So that's one thing that we have had in place for a while. Something new to us is a behavioral health telemedicine option. Through our health plan, we already had, general health telemedicine, but we added recognizing that employees were trying to go get in with providers, whether virtually or in person, and everybody was booked up. There was nothing available. So we reached out to our provider and found out that we had an option for behavioral health telemedicine, where employees could have access to confidential counseling 7 days a week. They can make an appointment with a therapist, with a psychiatrist, and it's somebody that they can see for an ongoing basis. And in order to further remove barriers, KEMI is paying for the cost of all of those visits. So there's no copay or anything that employees or their family members have to pay in order to qualify for that service. We also have an employee assistance program, as I'm sure most everyone does. And so obviously we've tried to, make sure that we consistently put those resources out there so employees are aware. Something that we've tried to do a lot in the past year is just provide good interactive education and content on our intranet for employees. And we've had a big collaborative approach with our diversity, equity, and inclusion and our well-being committees together to, see what's going on, whether it's something that needs to be focused on in a particular month or just something we recognize is going on with our employees that we need to provide resources. So some examples, September is Suicide Prevention Awareness Month. So we have a post on our intranet now regarding resources and links, warning signs, how to get help for somebody that you suspect is considering. And then we are coordinating that with NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness. And we actually, they're doing a walk on the 9th. So we have coordinated that with our wellness vendor so that employees can actually earn points for participating in the NAMI walk. So that's one example. Another, October 15th is National Pregnancy and Infant Loss Remembrance Day. Many people have experienced a loss, and it's something that not a lot of folks talk about. So one of our employees who actually just went through a loss in the last couple months reached out to me and said she wanted to write something. She felt like she wanted to share her story. So that's something that we're going to be posting and hoping that content will encourage somebody else that's been struggling and maybe didn't speak up.
Wow.
Yes. So something else that we have done, you talked about, Kirsten talked about, we sent people home. So most of our employees were able to be at home and felt safe. But a lot of them had family members, spouses, parents, et cetera, who are, first responders working in the medical teams, professions where they could not, stay home, and they were stressed and worried about that. So we created a KEMI family support group, both an email distribution group, and then within our our technology that we can do chatting. There's a group so that they can kind of, talk with somebody else that's going through some of the same things that they are. Something new for you all, you all may be aware that SHRM has just announced a workplace mental health certificate program. So that's something I actually just registered for. And so I'm hoping to learn a little bit more about ways that I can help continue helping my KEMI family through the mental health crisis. One thing I think that's not on the slide, but we started doing last spring, I guess, we started doing Wellness Wednesdays at KEMI, and we just were encouraging employees, you've got so much going on, take 15 to 30 minutes once a week just for you. Focus on your mental health, your financial health, your physical health. And we are working with our wellness provider to offer some mindfulness exercises that we can let employees participate in at least once a month on Wellness Wednesdays. And one thing that Kirsten said that made me think, we did a quarantine bingo last year where we had like a bingo card, and each square was something to try to help with your mental health. So one of them was schedule a week off or a day off, try something new with your family, call somebody you haven't talked to for a while, send an encouraging note, just little things like that to try to encourage people to do some mental health wellness activities. So those are just a few of the things KEMI is doing. Thank you for letting me share. I'm happy to answer any questions anybody has.
Yeah, so we did have a question come through that basically just says, what are some suggestions for HR to approach upper management to help them understand just how important this is? And I think that'd be for both Kirsten and you, Rebecca.
Well, I think we're very blessed in that our upper management is completely on board and understanding that it is a crisis. Obviously, taking statistics from our medical plan, the high use of, anti-anxiety medications, things like that. That's just a numbers thing for them to see, visits and medications. But just, a personal story, something, those kinds of things definitely can also get to them. Kirsten probably has some other ideas.
You've said it, Rebecca. It's data, but data from the sources that this level of people will often bump into. And so McKinsey has great research. The Wall Street Journal, I saw this today and I was like, this is awesome, because when it shows up in the Wall Street Journal, this is women in the workplace, but there's plenty of information here about how men and women are experiencing burnout. And so when things like this show up in the Wall Street Journal, it only helps us with our mission and our message, but it's seeking out the data from the publications that are most often read and trusted by this group. And that's not always HR publications. It really has to be pulled from other sources, I think sometimes to get attention.
Wonderful. Lyle, you're muted.
I'm sorry, other questions?
Yeah, we had one other one for Kirsten. They basically asked how Brown-Forman, or how you all were able to justify offering the 3-month parental leave option without knowing the utilization and potential impact to the business when you created the policy.
Like so many other decisions we have to make in HR every day, part of it was a leap of faith. And we just had to see what would happen. And did it have the potential to be really challenging if 90% of our workforce did it? Sure. And if that had happened, we would have had to talk about different start and stop times for folks so that our business didn't grind to a halt. We didn't end up facing that situation, but we also knew that the cost of replacing talented individuals who just needed the time to focus on their families and the other stressful elements of this pandemic, it would be better to not lose them entirely than to only lose them for 90 days. And so part of it was just understanding full replacement is often the most expensive option versus supporting people in different ways.
Wow, good input. I wonder if other people have done some exciting things in your workplace. I know people have. And if you put that in the chat box just real quickly, it'd be fun to see what kinds of things you did. Like we sent pizzas home one time to everybody. And then we already had an event planned on a Friday afternoon, like at 4:00, but pizzas arrived at their door just before that. That was kind of a fun thing. But oh, Allison, I see you've got another note there. Somebody else said something, or?
They just said thank you.
Thank you, Jewel. Okay. Hey, we've got another special guest, and actually, Angie Bailey is going to introduce our next guest because she recruited him. Angie, take it away.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm really pleased to introduce Derek. Derek and I have known each other for a long time. He's with Wayne Corporation, an EAP vendor based out of Louisville, Kentucky. We've worked with them in previous jobs that I've had, and I've had the pleasure of working with Derek personally. So thank you, Derek, for joining us. I'll let you take it from here.
Yes, thank you, Angie, for the introduction, and thanks to Hannah Resource Group for having me on. And tough act to follow. Our first two panelists had some great information. I think you'll see some common themes. More so, maybe I'm talking about it from the actual provider of some of these mental health services, and maybe we'll give you some different things to look at. And I know Kirsten had just mentioned research and facts and statements and things like that can be impactful, and you'll see some of that in my presentation that we dug up as well. So first thing I usually want to say is to understand mental health in the workplace, you need to probably just get an overview of kind of what's going on with mental health in general, or the mental health system across the country. And the bottom line is, and I've said this many times, the people I'm talking to, is our system is stressed. And I know all of folks are stressed, but the whole entire system, the system as a whole, is stressed. And there's some reasons behind that. And you can see some of the bullet points we have up here. And the facts are that people are using it more often. There are folks that maybe previously may not have used it, however, have experienced that, with the pandemic, reasons that maybe kind of took them over that edge to go ahead and say, you know what, I think I am going to use it. So the acuity, severity of cases are increasing, thus increasing more folks into the system. Some of the general issues that we're seeing from the pandemic, definitely grief. And when thank you, sorry. Go back to grief if you don't mind. So when I mention grief, these are probably the three since the pandemic, if you see that bullet point: grief, marriage and relationship, alcohol, substance abuse. Those are probably the three most common presenting issues that we're experiencing. And this is feedback from my counselors and therapists. And when I say grief, it's not just for loss of the loved one. It is also grief for losing activities, or not going to work in person. It's losing everyday things that we're used to having. So that seems to be a really higher presenting issue that we've experienced. A lot of stress on relationships, a lot of stress in marriages, and definitely, and I'll provide a little bit of information, additional, maybe a tool even for you guys on alcohol and substance abuse increase that's experienced as well. So there's a good news and there's kind of a tough news when I share this information. The good news is accessibility to mental health is increasing. And we've already talked about it a little bit on this today, and that is that telemedicine, telehealth has really been flipped to the on switch, whereas it was kind of being dabbled in leading up to the March of 2020, and now it is all on board. The tough news is, because of all the stress on the system, the availability of providers is becoming very difficult. In our community, we're hearing 8 weeks or longer if therapists are even taking new clients. So it's important, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, to have a resource where that folks can get timely care. And we can go to the next slide then. Thank you. So what I've done is pulled some research, and I certainly won't read all this to you, but just kind of mention it, and then we'll talk about a little bit of a tool. I think that's kind of gives you some interesting data. So a lot of this, I think, is kind of, as you read it, you're going to say, yeah, that makes sense, right? 4 in 10 adults report symptoms of depression since May of 2020. Makes sense, right? There's a couple of statistics here. Folks that have suffered some economic challenges are suffering more mental health symptoms than those that haven't, almost double. We have statistics on essential workers versus non-essential. And really, a lot of the categories there have increased in severity, sort of depression, substance abuse, even suicidal thoughts. And then in the last couple of items there, just the increase in anxiety and depression, which I think, we've talked a little bit about today already, but that's definitely the forefront of COVID burnout, COVID anxiety, COVID depression. We can go to the next slide. So one tool that I'll read you this stat: 60% of adults reported an increase in alcohol use during the pandemic. Now, usually when I say that in front of a group, I get quite a few people nodding their head, and that's okay. An interesting website I encourage folks to go and check out. We've used it a couple times in the past. It's kind of a mouthful, but alcoholcostcalculator.org. So what this does is it allows you to plug in a few points of data for whether it's your company or you're just interested in doing a little bit of research. And what it does is, so you're going to put what state you're in, your industry, how many employees you have. It's going to spit out for you an estimate. Again, it's a program, but it's going to spit out, hey, there's probably X amount of people in your workforce that have a problem with drinking. And I think this probably is increasing with the pandemic. That's kind of why I'm tying these together, as well as the dependents. Now, I did kind of cut and paste. There's quite a bit of information that it spits out at you. If you look at the next slide, you'll see that it also boils it down to, what could this potentially cost my company? Here's an average hourly wage I think we did the sample was 3,000 employees at a manufacturing company in Kentucky. What are some days that are missed? What does that cost the company potentially? So there's some real kind of interesting data that you can get out of that and play around with. So I encourage you folks to check that out. That's alcoholcostcalculator.com. So Kirsten, did a great job talking about some of these things that you're going to see on this slide. But everything I've kind of said leading up to now, just know that these things are happening. These are affecting your employees, and they're affecting your employees' family members. So what can employers do? You could almost plug in Kirsten's talk right here on what can employers do, because I thought it was fantastic. And it is. It's prioritize mental health in your workplace and communicate that intent and provide support, stay in touch, right? So Brown-Forman, it sounds like they're doing a fantastic job of that, on the forefront of coming up with some innovative ideas. And that's kind of, when we hear that, that kind of gets us excited on our side of the fence, right? And EAP is a way to do that. And again, that's kind of obviously my expertise. So, we're a standalone EAP. So we just encourage folks to have an EAP that you can expect good communication as well as good response from in a timely manner. Know your utilization. So know what's going on with your EAP. Are people using this? How many? What are the impacts it's having? What are some of the trends? Those kind of things should be just topics of conversation that you can have with your EAP. And I think that can really make it a useful program in those regards. So good mental health workplace programs. We can talk about increasing productivity. I believe that sometimes people like to use the term presenteeism. So people actually performing well while they're at work. Those things are all affected by how our mental health status is, as well as people in our home. And I would even add into that, it's not on the slide, is that to recruitment and retain of employees. So having that conversation that we've got a robust mental health program, it's a hot topic in our world right now. We want you to know that you can use that to come work for us. I think that's a great addition to when you're out recruiting talent. And I know that that's become a challenge for human resources right now as well. So just a real quick kind of what we're like, really boiled down what the EAP is experiencing. And again, it's pretty common theme to what we've talked about leading up to this last slide. And that is, where there's an increase in usage. Kirsten mentioned that at Brown-Forman, that they saw that as well. Getting to use telehealth has been an overwhelmingly positive response from the folks in our portfolio. And, just comments like, what, it was nice that I didn't have to hop in the car and lose my half an hour there or half an hour back to do a face-to-face session. So we anticipate telemedicine being still, when this is long in our rearview mirror, and I don't know when that'll be, I still think that telehealth will still be a very strong component of mental health for folks. It really has opened those accessibility doors open. And folks seem to be appreciative of EAPs kind of not having that I have to qualify, I have to get a authorization and sign up and whatnot to get an appointment. It should be very low amounts of red tape, simple phone call, talk to a person live, get an appointment, and don't have to worry about a lot of those kind of hurdles to jump. Again, those are barriers that can close down some of that accessibility. So that's some of the feedback that we've gotten. And at the end of the day, you know, some of the feedback from employees is, hey, our employers are talking about this now. That's how we heard about this, your program, or that's how we decided to take that extra step to access the EAP. So just to support some of the things that Kirsten was talking about in her presentation as well. So that's kind of an update from the EAP side, as well as just some overview of what's going on in the mental health system in general. Of course, happy to answer questions. I think you're on mute there, Lyle.
Allison, anything?
No new questions.
All right. Derek, thank you. That was very thorough. In fact, Kirsten, Rebecca, and Derek, what a team you guys have made. Really covered a lot of good stuff, and I hope people got some good ideas out of this. So really great. I appreciate it very much. Well, why don't we jump up to a legal update? Tyler's here to lead us through that today. I keep waiting for him to bring his son on this program. Come on, someday you got to do that. You tempt us all the time with this photo.
And maybe next time I'll have him do the presentation.
That'd be okay. I don't know if I can afford the upgrade, but let's go for it.
So we talked a little bit at the last webinar. Well, we talked a lot about the executive orders, the president's 6-step plan, and importantly, OSHA. And while we do know a little bit more, OSHA has still not issued their update. Just about every publication is out there searching for it the second it comes out. It has not came out yet. So we do know more, but just a little bit more. And a lot of this is based on the questions we got from you all last week, trying to go into a little bit more depth and questions we've gotten since. Hopefully trying to answer some of them, although a lot of the answers are still going to be, we don't know. We just have to wait. So let's get right into it. With the mandated vaccinations for the federal government employees, that is likely to be held to be valid. That's another thing we're going to do. And some of the ones where the legality is up in the air, or how courts are going to determine it, we're going to try to give you a little bit of speculation as to what we think, whether it's going to be valid or not. This is one that we think is going to be valid. The president has full control of his branch, the executive branch. Mandating the federal employees be vaccinated is likely to be completely valid. Now, whether unions are involved is where things get a little bit tricky. Whether the executive branch has a duty to bargain under a collective bargaining agreement, that's yet to be seen, and it's going to depend a lot on what OSHA says. But in the end, I think that there will be a duty to bargain. Whether that duty is somewhat superseded by the emergency orders and the detrimental harm to the community that's again yet to be seen. The president also issued an order, and we got a lot of questions about this, and that's the federal contracting provision. And we did do a little bit more research and found a little bit more information, although it's not a lot, and I'd like to update that for you all. And it appears that that order does not apply to current contracts. So if you have a current contract with the government in some way, your contractors are not required to be vaccinated yet. It is going to be a clause in new or renewed contracts, and that clause will say something along the lines of all employees in any way participating with this contract are going to be vaccinated, and that is the only contract that they're going to be issuing or reissuing. So you will be required to follow that should you pursue either a new federal contract or renewing a current contract. That's going to be a requirement. Again, courts have historically provided the president broad authority for executive powers. Although recently we did see the Supreme Court strike down the eviction moratorium. So it is a bit up in the air as to whether it's going to be allowed when it goes to federal contractors, but when the president is using his powers over executive employees and over the executive branch, he does have broad power, and I'd say that'll be upheld. Another executive order required that OSHA issue the emergency temporary standard, the ETS, that we've all been waiting to get, and again, we still have not. That the big issue with the OSHA ETS is going to be requiring all employers with 100 or more employees to be required to be vaccinated or submit to regular testing. We didn't really have a definition of regular, and technically we still don't, although it is looking like regular is going to be considered 1 week. So a weekly basis, having your employees who are not vaccinated be getting tested. Let's see. The vaccination will also likely be required to be paid for by the employers. Not necessarily the cost of the vaccine, being that the vaccine is free, but the cost of side effects. Let's say you get sick, you have to take a week off of work. They will be paid. It will not have to run as any kind of special vacation time. That will just be a paid time off. And again, we're waiting for that ETS to come out any day. We thought it would have been done 2 weeks ago, and that would have been done almost immediately over the weekend. But we have seen these take months. With this, we figured it would be rather sooner than later. So we'll update you as soon as we find something. But as of right now, we just don't know. And as to the validity of the 100 or more persons, employees, we don't really know. The court may not uphold that. They may say that requires direction that the president does not have, because remember, this is the first executive order and demand of the president that we're looking at today that does not concern federal employees or federal contractors. This is going nationwide to all employers, and whether that's going to be valid is left to be up in the air. In my personal opinion, I see that as not being valid, because the Supreme Court has directed that, if you look down at that bottom bullet, and this is a quote, they've directed that Congress speak clearly when authorizing an agency to exercise powers of vast economic and political significance. And that was them striking down the president's eviction moratorium. I could see something along the lines of that happening again here. They want congressional direction expressly authorizing this power. But as of right now, what OSHA says will go until the courts have said otherwise. So for employers, I think you have to plan for this happening and plan to move forward with all these rules set in place. We can go ahead and go on to the next slide. So these are some of the questions we've gotten. We can speculate as to answers, try to make an informed decision so you can better prepare. But again, OSHA could write something up and it's not at all what we expected. But these are the questions we've really received the most of, and we'll try to give you the best answer we can. So, will the vaccine mandate apply to employees working remotely? It may. And of course, that's going to be the simple, easy way out answer, but it may. They may leave an exception for those who never come into the office. But at least for most remote workers, they are at least on a bi-weekly basis or monthly basis having to make steps into the office in some way, shape, or form. So I would anticipate that if they have anything at all to do with any interaction with coworkers, customers, clients, they will be required to be vaccinated or submit to that regular testing. It may be a scenario where if they're having to come into the office that week, they have to get regularly tested. But that would then bring up the issue of, if you have to have them come into the office last minute, you've got a day or two where you decide, hey, we need to have you come in on this day. If they haven't been doing the regular testing and they're doing a one-off testing for the times they're preparing to come into the office, then that leaves them with a day to get the results of a test and they may not accept the rapid tests. We've seen a lot of issues with the rapid tests where they're not being quite as accurate. People may test positive or negative to a rapid test and then go do the full test, the PCR test, and they get the opposite result. So we're waiting OSHA's ETS as to whether rapid tests will be allowed, whether any negative test leaves you fine to go into the office, or whether that will apply to remote workers as well. So I anticipate them leaving maybe some small exception to that, but they may not. So be prepared as employers to require it for everyone, even if you have gone fully remote. Again, we already covered that. The tests are going to likely be weekly. I'd be surprised if it was anything other than weekly. If an employee decides to forego the vaccine in exchange for regular testing, is the employee responsible for the cost? And this is where things get a little bit tricky. Some states require the employers to reimburse employees for medical tests that an employer is requiring. So you need to check state guidelines. You can consult us and we can try to figure out what's best for your place of work. But that's going to be determined by what the ETS says. It's going to be determined by what your state law is. It may be something where employers are going to be required to be reimbursed for those tests, or maybe OSHA decides that more employees are likely to get vaccinated if it's cost prohibitive to not get vaccinated. So it could be used as a sword here to really force more vaccinations due to the costs, or they could force the employers to pay for the regular testing should an employee decide to do that. But then once they've done that, you have to take into consideration each of the state's different guidelines. So that's one where we're gonna need the specific language to be able to determine how to move forward with that question. So will there be accommodations such as religious and health related exemptions? I'm almost certain that there would be, at least for the vaccinations. Now for regular testing, I don't see how there could be a religious or health related exemption for regular testing. I'm personally unaware of a religious reason as to why you couldn't get tested. If there is one, please inform me. Otherwise, I'd be happy to know for the future. How do you determine the number of employees that you have? So that is another interesting question. Is it going to be by FEIN number? Is it going to be per location? Are remote employees factored into that? We don't know. That is going to be purely determined by the words of the ETS via OSHA. So we will try to keep you updated as soon as we hear more, but until we do, there's really nothing we can advise you on there because we don't know ourselves. So and finally, do unions have a say? It is likely that there will be some required bargaining. OSHA is going to have to give the direction there. So we will wait and see. Now, on this last slide, where is the ETS? Where do we stand with the booster shot? We don't know. Nobody knows when the ETS will come out except OSHA. We have no idea. So we had thought maybe we're seeing some small pushback from higher ups at OSHA to the president's order, maybe not agreeing with it, but that is pretty unlikely. OSHA is within the spectrum of the Department of Labor. As such, it's ran essentially by the Secretary of Labor, who is a member of the president's cabinet. We don't really see the Secretary of Labor going against the president when he's issued an order, especially one this public and this vast. So it's likely that they're really just trying to work out some of these details that we've been going over, because they're important questions that they need to answer in the coming days, weeks, months. When they do issue the order, we'll know a lot more. You can look at, I've listed a few places that are covering this ETS and constantly are trying to provide new articles for when it's going to come out, what it's going to say. Feel free to look into any of those, and of course check back with us. We'll be going over it as soon as we hear more. And And finally, the booster shot. The president's plan, I think it was the third step, was really pushing booster shots to everyone. That's kind of been pulled back a little bit, and primarily wanting the boosters for those 65 and older. If you have an underlying condition, those 50 and older, and if you live in any kind of long-term care facility, that is going to be 18 and up. So that for those individuals, it has been evaluated. So if you fit into those categories, go ahead, get your booster shot. Really, that's all we have until we hear more from OSHA. I can take your questions, but I can't promise that I can give you an accurate answer.
Well, I can throw some of the questions out there, and if the answer is I don't know, that's totally fine.
Let's hear it. What do we have?
All right, so we have, is there any guidance on when the president's orders take effect? I think that sounds like no until we get more information from OSHA, correct?
For the ETSs, yes, where those executive orders were demanding that OSHA go ahead and enter an ETS, then that's just an order to OSHA saying, hey, do this. That doesn't actually apply to the people until OSHA does something. On the other hand, if it's just an executive order, I don't have them pulled up in front of me, so I don't want to say one thing and have it be the other. But if I'm not mistaken, some of those orders weren't just the directives to OSHA, they were just orders in general, such as for the federal employees. That I don't think that was an OSHA directive. I believe that was just an executive order. Those go into effect right away.
Perfect. Okay, and do we know what is the Kentucky state law related to employer required testing, medical testing?
See, I know I should have probably pulled that up. I did not. We can try to have that ready for you at the next webinar. If I'm not mistaken, that question is related to the spending, whether it would be required to be paid for by the employer for the regular weekly tests. We don't know. I don't have that pulled up in front of me, but that's something that we can have ready for you at the next webinar. Another reason to tune back in. So.
Let's see, this is more of an opinion one. With PCR tests taking anywhere from 24 to 48 hours to get results, with some offices not open to provide results on weekends, how do they expect employers to continue to function?
See, no, that's a valid question, and it's something that I'm sure is an underlying reason as to why this is taking so long for OSHA to issue the ETS. From my own experience, I got a PCR test that took 4.5 days to get the results back. That was 3 weeks ago. So it is taking a lot of time, and that is especially with those with remote employees, which is why I was saying, if you're planning on just getting tested the day you're supposed to come into the office, I don't think that will necessarily be sufficient for you or your employer to stay within regulation, simply because if there is a delay in the testing, you're no longer able to come in, and you've kind of missed a deadline where you're either forcing your employer to keep you out of the office or run afoul of OSHA, which you definitely do not want to do. So even for those remote employees, I think it's going to be smart and not necessarily required via the rules, but required to actually maintain the rules to even have your remote employees be tested weekly if they are choosing to not get vaccinated.
I'm curious if any employers are implementing surcharges for the non-vaccinated to defray some of these costs, because this is going to be unbelievably expensive to implement given the current cost of reliable tests.
That's not something I don't know if I'm in the position to answer, but I do know that in some instances, I believe healthcare premiums have been adjusted in some way, shape, or form. I don't know about surcharges. That's kind of, that may be out of my realm of expertise. You may want to actually look to some of the SHRM people or employers themselves to try to answer that question.
Perfect. Yeah, and if anybody on this call has been doing anything in regards to adjusting health insurance premiums or anything, yeah, please chime in. Okay, where do employees get permission for religious and medical exemptions? Is there a form they have to get filled out, or a letter that is provided by the doctor or a religious clergy?
That's kind of going to be case by case basis. In terms of the medical side, you may need some kind of something from a doctor that may prove your claim, although I don't see employers really pushing back on you there just for their own purposes. for the religious exemption, I know we talked about it earlier this year, the religious exemptions to these kinds of things have been really expanded on. And you can really get by saying it's just a strongly held belief. I don't know of a form that you would have to do. I think it would just be more of a statement to your employer. This is my belief. It does have to be a closely held belief, but proving that or disproving that is kind of more difficult than it would seem. So we will see a lot more coming out with the ETS about what religious and medical exemptions are available. But until we actually see the words on paper, I can't really give you more than that.
All right, we're down to 2 more. FFCRA leave is set to expire September 30th. Do we have any indication this is going to be extended?
I don't believe so.
Perfect. Okay, and do we know if there's any distinction between seasonal employees versus full-time employees under the pending OSHA testing requirement?
No, that's another thing. We don't know whether it'll be just full-time, seasonal, part-time, remote, whatever. They're until we see the words on paper, we're not really going to have much of an answer. But if I was taking a guess here, and I think I'd probably be correct, and that would be all employees, period. It doesn't matter if they're seasonal or not. It is what it is. If you're an employee under an FEIN, I'm assuming you're going to have to be vaccinated or weekly testing.
Got it. All right. Perfect. Well, that is all we have. Thank you so much.
And Tyler, I am so impressed the way that I didn't notice any change in your mental health status when that phone kept ringing. Clearly,
yeah, apparently I'm a busy person today. So.
Clearly, they cannot get through to you on this line, with just in the chat box. So they're just calling your office. Anyway, hey, that was terrific. I really appreciate it. Thanks for keeping us up on this stuff. Tell Jim hello. We know he's out of the state today, and everybody that spoke, Kirsten, Rebecca, and Derek. Thank you all for your input. I know you've picked up the SHRM codes and the HRCI codes on there. That's important to keep up with it. If anyone is struggling to get enough SHRM points, and if you've been on most of our 45 calls, you would have totally covered it. But you can always go to our website because we've got all 45 of these out there. Pick one that you think might be interesting, or pick the shortest one and go through it. If you haven't seen it, you could use that code. So how about that? Hey, I personally need to confess to you that I have some serious mental stress. Some things are a plus and a minus. This is awesome, but stressful. Our business continues to grow like crazy. And right now I need an HR generalist and an experienced HR recruiter because we have so much going on. So that's creating some mental stress for me, but hey, that might create some release for you. If you've got some talents in those areas and you'd like to join us, we could use some more talent on our team. So any final words? I see Rita Johnson just put something. Oh, a thank you note. Thank you, Rita, all the way from E-Town. So nice to hear from you. Any final comments from our guests, our speakers, or anyone? All right. Hey, we're going to wrap it up early. How about that? 1 hour. We'll keep you up on things that are going on. Don't can the whole thing quite yet, Chase, because I want to make sure I've picked up all the comments. But we really appreciate you joining us. We hope you have a great week, and let's keep fighting this thing together. And if you just really need a big mental release, call me. I'll chat with you. We'll cut up. Have a good time. And I hope you all have a great week.